first episode, this will be one where you get to know us. So Steve and I did not grow up in the same area, and I think that we should start by just telling our audience where we grew up and some of our roots. What's our backstory? So Steve, where did you grow up?
A long time ago. I am a military baby. I was born in Jacksonville, North Carolina. My father was a U.S. Marine. We moved around a lot. We wound up back in this area because of the old Griffiths Air Force Base was in the Utica, Rome area. And we moved to, we were first in Norwich, then we were in Utica, and then we moved to New Hartford. My career aspirations, I've had this conversation with Heather before. When I was 12 years old, I had a paper out, and I used that paper out to open up a small business at age 12. I was going door to door, knocking on families' doors to pick up money. I didn't, as Heather mentioned before, I didn't come from much. Neither of us did, and we kind of made our own way. And I literally would, as a 12-year-old boy, go knock on somebody's door and ask them if they wanted their fence painted or if they wanted their driveway shoveled. And it gave me quite a background in talking to families and gave me quite a background in the business part of everything. And I actually took that age 12 business and created it into a business that had 28 full-timers.
That's amazing. That just shows a little bit, the audience has an idea of your drive. I think about me at 12, and I was babysitting and helping families at that moment. And I had a sister with autism too. We didn't know it was called that. 40, 50 years ago, people weren't using that word. But I was also very driven. I was the kid in high school that was going to college at the same time. I would literally get in my car and drive to a local college and take classes there. So I think that gives our audience kind of an idea of that personality that we have. But I don't want it to make people think that they couldn't do the same thing. Even if you have a different personality than me and Steve, the things that we're going to talk about, they apply to everybody. At least that's our goal.
Yeah, my advocacy started probably when I got married at a young age, pre-19, which is very young. And I had 3 children with my first wife. And around the age of, at the time they were 4, 8, and 12, where I'll bring my advocacy where it started. My 4-year-old starting having issues with behaviors and quirks that we just hadn't seen before, and nobody else had it either. It was 30 years ago, and nobody knew what autism was. We had to kind of learn the hard way, trying to figure all that out. And having to do that put strains on the marriages, and I wound up fighting in court for custody of them. And the reason I bring that up is because it probably was a ground breaking part of the advocacy part that who I am today. Because I remember a sitting judge telling me that I'm a dad. You're not going to get custody of your children ever. And I did get custody of my children, but it took 2.5 years in court to do that. And at the time they were 4, 8, and 12. And it gave me quite a bit of background on that I could do something that I didn't really know anything about. I could do something that I was afraid of. I could do something that I didn't think I could do, and I did. And that's the kind of the thing that I'm hoping that we can inspire in other parents, that sometimes things are difficult, sometimes situations are difficult, but it's how we come out of that, which is what matters.
I would agree, because you can either let yourself get buried in it, kind of crawl into bed and pull covers over your head, or you can crawl up on top of all of it and have a different perspective. And that's what I try to do. I also had a failed marriage. It was very hard. I'm an overachiever. I don't like to get things wrong. And what I realized is sometimes, everything happens for a reason. But when you walk away from something, you've learned things, even the hard things. I think you learn more when it's hard than when it's easy. And I also had, family court that was a beast. I give you so much credit as a dad going through that system. My husband now also did the same thing. You know, a dad fighting for custody is not something we always see. But I had a federal court case for my one daughter, Devin, and that really woke me up to what I could achieve if I just kept going. You know, we hear a lot of no's when we're family members and we're fighting for the things that our loved ones need. We hear no a lot. And what that court case taught me is it might have took 8 years. That's a long time. But I didn't give up. And I just always in my back of my mind kept thinking, we can make it better. You know, sometimes we can't win. We can't win every battle, but we can make it better. And when you start to shift your mindset and you think about the little things that will make life feel better, then it feels more doable. And I remember being a single mom and 2 little kids, and now I have 4 kids, and they all have different levels of disability. And people say, how do you do that? How do you live that life? It's my life, right? And we all do what we have to do. And I think that, you've had how many foster kids come through your home? I mean, you've had so many different foster kids, and I'm sure people say the same thing to you. How do you do it?
Yeah, normally I wouldn't be stuck on how many children. The reason I bring it up is because we know where most of them are, and the total is 178 children have come through our home.
178
through foster care, through respite care, through raise the age care, through disability care, and just being known in the community that we would take just about any child with high needs into our home.
So how did it start? I mean, I know we've talked about it, but for people, it's not like you woke up one day and you're like, I'm going to be a foster parent. I mean, if I remember correctly, neighbors started just bringing their kids over because they knew you could handle it. You were doing such great things with your son, and they thought, we're gonna go see if Steve can help.
Those great things with my son didn't start that way. At age 4, he was flushing G.I. Joes down the toilet. Oh, no. And we had a on-staff plumber.
I was going to say, Devin just flushed spoons down the toilet. That was her thing.
Right.
That's so funny.
And when you go to the doctors and they don't know what autism is, they never even heard of it, and you get no idea what's going on. You learn, and we had to learn the hard way, and it was tough. But when you learn the hard way and you go search for answers and solutions, like I did back then, you finally get some things that work, some solutions. And then what happened is people in the neighborhood were bringing their children over. I remember one little boy that wasn't allowed anybody else's house in the neighborhood but mine. And the reason was because I could handle him. I knew how to I had the patience to deal with a child with a lot of difficulties, a lot of different disabilities, a couple of them not even diagnosed at that time. But I was willing to step up and try and help him. And then the word got out, and we just started doing more and more of that. And eventually we got into family care, which is the state. We were taking individuals out of IRAs that they needed places to go. And we took an older man. And
in case people don't know what an IRA is, what's an IRA?
Individual.
Oh, well, you don't have to define it. I know. There's so many acronyms.
It's like a group home, and it's usually where they don't know where to put somebody, and that'll be a topic down the road that we can talk about.
So it would be somebody with intense needs or complex needs that
Yes.
maybe they need medication or 24/7 staffing and supervision.
Yeah. So one of the 2 people that we took in in the very beginning when we got into state family care was a 68-year-old man that we saw that had dementia. And the other one we took in was a blind, I think he was 16, 17 years old, in our home. And look, the challenges are there, just like it is in the disability community, with trying to help. And I want to give one quick story, and I don't think I've ever told you, Heather. This blind young boy that was coming to our home, when he had a behavior, nobody really knew how to handle it, and they couldn't get through to him in the IRA with staff, around the clock staff over there, and a team of a social worker, a psychologist, and all that over there. But every time he got upset, he'd punch a hole in the wall. He came to our house, and that's what he did. And the first time,
That's what he knew how to do.
And when he had a behavior, he punched a hole in the wall, and it's pretty unique how we got that stopped. I actually went out in the garage and got stuff, and I helped teach him how to fix it. And what it did was it empowered him to fix it. So every day we would put joint compound on, we put the new piece of sheetrock in, we put joint compound on, made it sand it. He'd get off the bus and go sand it every day. And I probably dragged it out a little bit longer than I was supposed to.
You were learning as you were going.
Because
right?
I wanted to make sure that he got the point. From that day on, he never punched a hole in the wall again. And to this day, and we still have contact with him. He's much older. I think he's 10, 12 years older now. He's never punched a hole in the wall since. You
took a different approach. And I think that brings me to an important part that I want to talk about with my history. So I told you how my sister had autism, but we didn't know what it was. And I think in some ways that was a blessing for her. She grew up in a time where she was just quirky. She was different. She was Erin. People just took her for who she was, and they didn't make assumptions because there was no label. And because Erin didn't have a label, she got through high school. And then she went to college and took classes to become certified in early education. She drives a car. She works 3 jobs. And I wonder if it would have been different, because I have a lot of individuals I've worked with over the years as a school psychologist and a behavior specialist, and they had that label, and they didn't want to lose their services, and they had to keep telling the state how disabled they were so they could get their SSI or they could continue to qualify for Medicaid. And that became like the focus for so many people. And now 80% of people with IDD, people who have an intellectual or developmental difference, they don't have a livable paycheck. And we know some of our family members and our loved ones might never have a livable paycheck. But 80%, when we think of how brilliant some of the people we've worked with and the people we know from our neighborhoods, they should be working. And we went wrong somewhere. And I think that I don't know where the balance is. We have to qualify for a service, but I feel like I had to apologize to the families that's what I concentrated on in the beginning of my career, because I wanted to get them in the door and I wanted to connect them with services. But just like you, with that young man, it's not just the services. It's like how you show them how to live their life. That's the important part. And we get lost in it. I'm sure there are people listening right now that are just tired and they think, I don't have the money. I don't have the patience, Steve. I'm not going to sit there and do that. But that little extra effort, that's what made the difference for him.
Exactly. And I think that there's a lot of, like you said, a lot of families out there that probably think they can't do any of the kind of the things that we've mentioned so far, and many more stories that we plan on bringing out in the future. But they can. And we hopefully through this podcast, we can help teach some of that stuff, help empower you as family members and parents to find creative, out-of-the-box situations that allow for solutions and a better outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. So when Devin was born, just for a little recap, I was evaluating babies at the time, okay? So I was with babies all day long, and I knew what a baby should do when they are first born, right? So they hand me my baby, and everybody's so happy, and I look at her, and she has every red flag, like every single thing on the newborn checklist, and I thought, something's wrong. And I'm looking at the doctor, and I'm expecting her to say, something's wrong, but no one did. And actually, my pediatrician, for the first 8 months of her life, kept saying I was being overreactive. And here I had been the professional. I'd been in so many homes and helped hundreds of families figure out their kids. And I'm saying, something's not right. This is not what I expected. At 8 months old, why isn't she sitting? And those doctors told me she would never walk, she would never talk, she would never do all these things. And maybe that's what pushed me to, do things different. But she's doing amazing things now. So I'm glad I didn't listen to the no. And I'm glad I had that experience, but it's tough. It's tough when you're in the middle of it. It's exhausting.
Exactly. And, I think it's important that people understand that we're going to relay success stories to you guys, but we're also going to realize the failures in the systems that are out there with our IDD population. There's not a day that goes by that I don't hear a different story constantly about a failure in a system that's supposed to be protecting our most vulnerable and doesn't.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think the thing that the audience will feel is a little different with our format is this isn't to call a certain group out or a specific politician or a leader or a government entity, because when you really sit down with those people, they want good things for us too. It's just, like you said, the systems are broken. So the focus is really sitting with people and having conversations. And I'll be the first to admit, I don't like confrontation, and I don't want to sit at the same table as someone who disagrees with me. But when I do, that's when the magic happens. That's when we break down those barriers. So I think that I'm really excited to see how this unfolds. We have been talking about different topics that we want to discuss. And I think that would be something that let's give everybody a little teaser. What are we going to go over, Steve?
Sure. Look, I think people would be shocked to realize how many people in foster care come into the system with already ready-made disabilities. They're coming into, on a CPS pull, they could be traumatized, they could be removed in the middle of the night, and sent to somebody's house in a bag or nothing. And both of those situations have happened when they came to our home. And I think that people need to understand that when we go to get the diagnoses from these kids, because a lot of times they haven't even been to a medical doctor or a dentist, we discover that there's autism, there's mental health issues, there's developmental delays almost constantly. And that's one of the topics that I would like to talk about.
Access to health care is such an important topic for us to talk about. And I think that we're definitely going to hit on that in a bunch of different ways, because not just the kids with foster care, right? It's everybody with a developmental disability right now. If you have Medicaid, good luck finding someone to take your case, because they lose money when we're their patients. So that's something I know we both want to talk about. And I want to talk about the caregivers in New York State. Whether you're a parent or a DSP or a CDPAP attendant, I want people to understand that the people caring for our loved ones with IDD need to get cared for too. We need to care about them. So and everybody who knows me knows that's a topic I always circle back to. We have so many ideas about potential for shows. I love that you hit on mental health already. Also, first responders and emergency rooms. And, lots of us have an experience from our perspective as a parent to one child. But for you, you've done this hundreds of times with hundreds of different scenarios. So I'm really looking forward to, your perspective on things. But I know working with first responders and emergency room staff, it's been incredibly hard, not just for my daughter, but really for a lot of the people that I care about, that have IDD. So I think that that's a really important topic: guardianship, shared decision making, the transition cliff, all those things that parents are worried about. But let's talk a little bit about housing, because you're doing such a cool thing right now.
Yeah, I find that I have to get behind the scenes, so to speak, to get some of these things done and worked on. And the typical approach, sometimes I get the no's. And when I get those no's, I got to find a different way. So I was able to get on the board of the Utica Center for Development in Utica, and it's a veterans outreach center, but they're getting more and more into mental health. They're getting into homelessness for vets. They're getting into sensory for children with autism and a few other things. And I remember one of the recent board meetings we had, I asked about converting a couple of because we've been able to go out and buy a couple churches and actually almost a whole block of housing in Utica from the city, or, the churches were private, and try and get them to convert them, because they were going to convert it into housing for vets, which is fantastic, but they had extra floors. So I asked about doing something with the autism community, the disability community that are looking for housing, whether it be a respite situation or more of a permanent situation. And they're willing to do it. And those are the kind of things that we need to inspire and get other families across this state to look at some of these unique things and ways to do it. So the answer isn't just to say that we have an issue with housing. The answer is to find a way to make it work, even with all the no's.
Right. And if you did it the traditional way, I mean, I'm trying to even think about how you would say, let's buy a whole block and make it into housing, right? Like if you pitch that at a community meeting or, to your county official, they'd say, okay, Steve, great idea. But what you did is you went in, you came in the back door. You started talking to people. And what we find is people want to do good things. They want to help. But when the systems are broken, they keep going back to that system and trying to make it work. But instead of using that traditional system and saying, New York State, give us a grant, give us funding, that entitlement kind of idea, what you've done is completely different. You're talking to the people in the community, the stakeholders, and you're figuring out how to rally them together, how to get them excited about something. That's how you built your autism barn, right? It started with a small idea, so a place for your son to hang out, and it turned into this 2-story barn that, people are coming. Organizations are coming to your house now and utilizing that for their population. So I love that idea of coming in the back door and making friends with the people who can make things happen. And they're not superficial relationships. These are real connections that you've made over the years. It makes me think of one project I did I worked at one of the largest nursing homes in the country. And a lot of the people who live there, you think nursing home, they're going to be old. But what I found are a lot of people with IDD were ending up there. And it's something I didn't know. And here I was, a parent and a professional in that community, and I had no idea that all these people, babies sometimes, and we have babies in nursing homes, if they have needs that can't be met in the community right now because things are so strained, they end up there. And this was before the pandemic, I realized some people never even get outside. So I started thinking about, when those city buses drive by and they have the wrap on them and it can look like anything. It can look like the Amazon jungle instead of the bus, right? I thought, what if we wrapped the walls and we made it look like the inside was outside? So somebody could come in and hear a stream and look at a stream and see trees on the wall. And it was a small idea and it grew and grew. And then vendors would get excited. I would tell them about it. I would introduce them to the residents and I say, look, Eki's never been in the water before. He's never rolled his chair up to the edge and looked into the canal. And they bought into it and they got excited and they all started donating different pieces of it. And it turned into this thing that I would have never imagined. The news was there and then other hospitals started showing up and they started creating those rooms in their hospitals. And I thought, that was just an idea. It was just that moment where I saw that person and I thought, they really want to go outside, but they can't. What can we do? And with housing, we have to start thinking of it that way. Not what we are entitled to, but what can we do? How can we work with the people who could help us instead of demanding something? And I mean that in the nicest way, because I've been on the other side of that where I'm demanding people give me what I'm supposed to get. But we can see New York State is struggling, right? All the states are. And that funding's not there, right? So we have to come around and come through the back door.
Exactly. And, it's interesting that you say that with the housing piece because people are getting creative. There's a coalition down in New York City that's working on housing right now. There's several families that have gotten together and bought homes in different parts of the state that I know of in Utica and Syracuse, where they're getting creative with some of these things. And that's what it's going to take. It's going to take the families. I did want to mention a couple kind of tail off of some of the other things you had mentioned on the medical piece. One of the big things that we're seeing right now, and I'm hearing it a lot from families across the state, is the waiting list for children in families in this state. We have children in my home right now that have been on waiting lists for 2-3 years for dental.
My daughter's on that list. I know exactly what you're talking about.
And when you get a call from the one person in the one clinic in our area that might take an autistic child and takes Medicaid, and they tell you they can't really do things for one child in my home because they don't have a dental hygienist anymore, or the other child needs extensive work, needs to be sedated, and there's no one to do it, which puts you on another wait list for 3 years. And I'm hearing it a lot. We have to work on that, but I think you're going to find that Heather and I have been working behind the scenes with some solutions with some of that. We expect to have a doctor who helps accredit some of the dentists on our podcast, who's willing to roll up her sleeves and help us find solutions to some of this.
And I think one of the other things is there are no evil people in this world that are trying to hold us down, really. It's not like a good versus evil thing. You know, we had a strategic forum, and it was OPWDD, and they've been traveling around the state, and they've been asking parents for public comment. Now, what I'll say is I've been one of those angry parents, and I've stood up and I've yelled and I've, demanded better. And it's not that we shouldn't want change. But this time around, when I sat at that strategic forum and I looked at the people sitting in front of us, they looked so tired and they looked embarrassed at moments because they know the system isn't working the way it should. And I can't imagine being in that position where everyone's looking at you and screaming at you and angry at you. And it shifted for me what our goal is. So instead of yelling at OPWDD, and for people who are tuning in that aren't from New York State, that's the Office for People with Developmental Disabilities. That's who gives us our services, whether it's certified or self-directed. And I thought, I have to align with them and help them see something a different way. Now, me speaking in publicly and saying what I wanted to say probably won't change anything. But following up with those people, the conversations, the one-on-ones, that's, I think, for you too, where we kind of really shift things, where they go, oh, I didn't think of that. That would work. Because if you're a DSP, a caregiver, or you're a parent, you're front lines. You're in the trenches. You're doing it every day. We have ideas that need to be heard. And that is why everybody gets a seat at the table here, because we have to hear everybody's different perspectives on things.
Yeah, Heather, I think you're right, dead on with that. What I've found over the years, and to be honest with you, up until the last couple of years, I didn't see a lot of light. And I do see a lot of light now because I think the families are realizing that there's only so much the state can do and only so much the providers can do. And that we're going to have to find a way to help ourselves and help our kids and help our families. And
yeah, no one's coming to save us, right? There's no knight in shining armor pulling up.
Right. And look, what I've found is when you get the state into a room, you find that they really, in many cases, don't know the stories. I don't know.
They're so removed, right?
And I'll give you one, for instance, in the foster care system, there's a state reg that says a foster kid can only stay in care for 15 to 22 months. And, I discussed this with a deputy commissioner with the state, and I was telling her how we had a kid in our home 9 years, and where we had kids in our home presently 6 and 7 years. And they say, what? And it tells you the disconnect that there is from the top to the bottom. So I think it's important for us as families to be that voice. We need to get in those situations, get a seat at those tables, and tell them these stories.
Right, because if you come in with a whole bunch of problems and they're massive and they involve thousands of people, that feels really unsolvable. That feels really overwhelming. But if you come in with one kid who needs dental work done and he needs to be sedated, and you show them how the system broke down and how he still hasn't been cared for, they can fix it for one person. And when they fix it for one person, then we know how to do it for other people. So that's the big push, guys. Instead of trying to change everything all at once, let's introduce our stories. Let's be a little vulnerable, tell people what's happening behind our closed door at home, give them some perspective, and that's when we're going to find the common ground.
Exactly. And I also think that with the stories, the other thing I found that there's only so much money in the budgets for any of this stuff. And it's important that we realize that, and that we've got to find a way, and the state has to find a way that we have to solve these issues with the money that's in there. And I had a conversation with somebody with the state recently about a child that was in our home that couldn't get dental, was on a waiting list, developed an abscess in his mouth. He wound up going by ambulance to Golisano to get dental work.
From Utica.
From Utica at an astronomical cost to the state. And that's the cost savings there. We had another child in our home who came into our home from a facility, been in care and facilities with mental health issues and everything else for years. He came in our home. I believe the total was 28 plus medications. He's now on 3 in my home. And
because you took that time
to
break it down, see what he really needed.
Right. And it's a process, but it's the family empowerment that makes it happen. Somebody standing up and saying, why is this child on 28 meds? And I think the punchline is, the financial punchline in all of this is, one of those meds he was on is $2,400 a month.
Wow.
A month. And when you have that cost savings that's not there anymore, because that's one of the meds that got reduced and then eventually discontinued, there's a cost savings that we can go to the state as a family member or because we have a seat at the table and tell them that story.
Right. And as we finish up, I'll tell you a little bit about a project that I'm doing right now. I'm the Director of Advocacy at AutismUp, and they recruited me because of housing issues, right? You know, they started that organization 20 years ago, and they serve families that have autism, but all different developmental differences. And as their kids have grown up, what they're focusing on, you know, they keep adding on. And they said, Heather, what we find with housing is we don't even know how to quantify the problem. We don't even know how to explain how extensive it is. So what I'm doing is I'm collaborating with all the nonprofits in our region, and I'm trying to collect information on what are the breakdowns, what are the barriers. And so we're bringing parents in, and we're not just filling out a survey. You know, we're not just checking boxes. We're connecting. They're sitting with leaders, local leaders. They're sitting with the CEO of the nonprofit. We're learning about viable housing options together. And then we fill out a survey to record what we want. So our voice is heard. And people keep saying, well, okay, what will you do with the final report? Well, we'll finally have the numbers. We'll know how many people are actually affected. We'll have the data. We can change legislation. Okay, and I know that sounds so scary to the average listener right now. They're like, change legislation. But guess what? It's usually one family who's really dedicated to a topic that keeps going to their assembly member's office or keeps calling their senator. They're the ones that get a bill passed because it matters to them. And people start to realize that they're that force, that driving force. We all can do that with the topics that are important. So we'll keep collecting the data, keep collecting the stories. And each week when you're tuning in, I hope that you walk away with just even a little nugget of something that you're like, maybe I could do that. Maybe this is something I could do. And maybe it's not the actual thing we did. It's just the steps we took. I want you to guys, everybody listening, to be inspired. And follow us on Facebook. Find our Facebook group. We're just growing. I'm sure we'll have more platforms soon. But find us, talk to us. Tell us what's important to you. And next time you tune in, you'll get to hear about it.
Heather, right now it's just you and I. I expect many more families to join us, and we'll find a way to fix this with solutions that work.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone.